Most people think awakening is beautiful. They imagine it as a gentle rising, a return to peace, a revelation that brings clarity. But the truth is far more difficult to digest, because spiritual awakening does not begin with light. It begins with fire. It begins with the shattering of the life you built around illusion. It begins with a descent, not a rise. And that descent is where most people turn back, not because they're weak, but because they were never told what awakening really demands. This path is not paved with comfort. It does not reward the ego. It tears it apart. It does not give you answers. It strips away the questions. It does not show you who you want to be. It reveals who you truly are, beneath all masks, all conditioning, all pretense. And that revelation is terrifying. Because to awaken is to die before you die. To lose everything that is false, so that only what is real can remain. That process for most is too much, too intense, too lonely, too honest. And so they retreat. They numb. They pretend. They say they've awakened, but live unchanged. Because surviving a spiritual awakening isn't about having an experience. It's about being willing to let that experience change everything. It's about facing your own darkness with open eyes. And that is why most never survive it. But you, if you are here, it means something inside you is ready to see. Not just the light, but the shadows. Not just the beauty, but the breaking. And in that willingness, your real journey begins. ChatGPT said, "It begins slowly, almost invisibly. A strange dissatisfaction, a quiet ache, a silent rebellion forming deep beneath the surface of the life you've constructed. Everything on the outside may still appear in place, your roles, your routines, your relationships, but somewhere within the sacred corridors of your soul, something begins to stir. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock politely. It rises, ancient and undeniable, like a forgotten memory aching to be remembered. This is the beginning of awakening. Not the blissful revelation most expect, but the slow dismantling of everything you thought you were. The tragedy is that most people confuse this divine unraveling with destruction. And in a way it is. The false self must die. And that death is not metaphorical. It is psychological, emotional, and deeply spiritual. It's the crumbling of the image you spent your entire life trying to maintain. That image that told you you were only lovable if you were perfect, only valuable if you achieved, only worthy if you pleased. That mask, that carefully crafted identity, is not who you are. But you've worn it so long, you forgot there was anything beneath it. And when the mask begins to fall, when the illusion begins to crack, panic rises. You reach for the familiar, even when it's the very thing that imprisoned you. You reach for old habits, old comforts, old narratives, anything that will allow you to feel in control again. But this process does not honor control. It honors surrender. And so the deeper you cling, the more violently the soul pulls away. It will not let you pretend anymore. It will not let you stay asleep in a dream that is too small for who you truly are. This is why most people never survive their spiritual awakening, because they cannot bear the death of who they were. They do not realize that this death is sacred, that it is the doorway, not the end. The ego screams in resistance, not because it is evil, but because it believes it is dying. And in a way it is, but something else is being born in its place, something truer, deeper, eternal. Yet to touch that part of yourself, to return to that source, you must be willing to be no one for a while. You must be willing to stand in the ruins of your former identity and not rush to rebuild. You will feel lost. You will feel naked. You will feel like everything is falling apart, because it is. But what is falling apart is not your life. It is your illusion. And that illusion must collapse if you are to be free. Most cannot bear that in-between space, the liminal void, where you are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. It is terrifying to stand in that emptiness and not know what comes next, but it is only in that sacred emptiness that the soul can speak. You must let the house of your false self burn, and you must let it burn without rushing to save what no longer serves you. You must watch the ashes fall and say, yes, let it all go. Let the lies I told myself die. Let the image crumble. Let the expectations dissolve. Let everything I held onto so tightly fall through my fingers like dust. Because only then, only in that unbearable freedom, can you begin to touch the truth. And what is that truth? It is not found in words. It is not something you achieve. It is not something others can give you. It is who you were before the world told you who to be. It is the silent presence that watched your life unfold without judgment. It is the deep knowing that you are not broken, not unworthy, not lost, but that you have simply been asleep in a dream. And now you are waking up. But the cost of awakening is everything that isn't real, and that cost is what most cannot pay. They want awakening without loss, truth without discomfort, light without shadow. But it doesn't work that way. To be born again, you must first agree to die, not in body, but in belief. Not in soul, but in self-thinning. And that death will feel like chaos. It will feel like failure. It will feel like everything is going wrong, when in fact, everything is going right. You are not being destroyed. You are being revealed. The moment the descent begins, most people panic. They think something has gone terribly wrong. They believe they've made a mistake, taken a wrong turn, opened a door they were never meant to open. What they don't understand is that the darkness is not a detour, it is the path. The spiritual awakening does not begin with visions of light or feelings of bliss. It begins with collapse, with confusion, with despair. It begins with everything hidden finally being seen. And what is hidden is not always beautiful. What is buried is not always easy to look at. When the soul begins to stir, it brings to the surface all the parts of you that were denied, repressed, shamed, and silenced. It does not do this to harm you. It does this to heal you. But healing is not gentle at first. It is violent in its honesty. It is raw in its exposure. It does not ask if you are ready. It only asks if you are willing. This is where most people turn back, because the moment the shadow rises, they mistake it for failure. They believe they are regressing, when in fact, they are finally meeting themselves. The rage they feel, the sorrow that pours out, the grief they've carried for years without knowing. It's not madness, it's memory. It's emotion that was locked away to protect the fragile identity they were forced to build, and now it demands to be felt. But feeling is a terrifying thing when you've been taught your whole life to avoid it. When pain arises, the impulse is to run. When anger surfaces, the reflex is to suppress. When sadness floods your chest, the instinct is to distract, to numb, to fix. But nothing truly transforms until it is fully allowed to be. And that means sitting in the dark without rushing to turn on the light. That means standing in the storm of your own emotions and not shrinking away. The darkness is not the enemy. The shadow is not your destroyer. It is your teacher. It holds the keys to the parts of you that got lost. It reveals the truth behind your patterns, your wounds, your fears. And yes, it's painful. It's disorienting. It breaks the illusion that you were ever in control. But that break is necessary, because control is what kept you asleep inside a cage built from your own avoidance. People say they want the truth, but few can bear the weight of it. The truth does not flatter the ego. It does not confirm your self-image. It reveals where you've abandoned yourself, where you've betrayed your own voice just to be accepted, where you've chosen silence over authenticity, comfort over growth. And when that truth comes, it shakes you to your core. It shows you all the ways you've been asleep in your own life. But that shaking is sacred. That disorientation is divine. It means the illusion is dying. It means the soul is reclaiming its rightful place. Still, the temptation will be strong to go back, to numb again, to blame the world, to tell yourself that awakening is too hard, too painful, too much. And that is why most people do not survive it. Not because they're weak, not because they're unworthy, but because they mistake the medicine for poison. They mistake the breakdown for punishment. They mistake the dark night for a dead end, when it's actually a holy initiation. If you want to know yourself, you must go where you've avoided. You must enter the dark corners of your psyche and sit there, not to analyze, not to escape, but to witness, to feel, to own. That's where freedom is born, not in the light that blinds you, but in the darkness that shows you what you've refused to see. The discomfort is not the problem, it is the invitation. The pain is not the punishment, it is the portal. So many give up too soon. So many turn away before the alchemy has even begun. They label the process as wrong because it doesn't feel good, forgetting that transformation rarely does. The old self doesn't die quietly. It claws, it resists, it makes you question everything. And that is exactly how you know you're close. Because real change doesn't come dressed in comfort. It comes dressed in chaos. It comes wrapped in the unknown. It comes as a fire that burns everything you are not, so that what you truly are can finally emerge. Do not mistake the dark for the end. It is the womb. It is the sacred space where the real you is being formed. In the beginning, you try to understand it all. You search for answers, read books, listen to voices that claim to know. You try to make sense of what's happening to you, why your life feels like it's unraveling, why nothing brings you the peace it once did, why you're restless, hollow, searching. The mind, so accustomed to figuring everything out, steps in like a loyal servant. It asks, what's the solution? What's the logic behind this? What can I do to fix it? But the awakening does not respond to logic. It does not unfold according to the mind's desires. The mind may speak in explanations, but the soul speaks in symbols. And this is where the struggle begins. Most people try to think their way through something that can only be felt. They seek certainty in a process built on surrender. They try to define the undefinable, to categorize what refuses to fit into the neat boxes of language. And so they suffer, not because something is wrong with them, but because they are listening with the wrong ears. They are looking for clarity where the soul is offering mystery. They are reaching for formulas in a process that is far more poetic than practical. The soul does not speak the language of the intellect. It speaks in dreams, in silence, in synchronicities, in the ache behind your laughter, in the moments of stillness where something deep within you stirs but has no words. It speaks in the tear you don't understand, the longing that has no clear origin, the pull towards something you cannot name. And if you are not quiet enough, if you do not slow down, you miss it. You override it. You dismiss it as irrational. But what you call irrational is often the most sacred voice you possess. This is why so many people abandon their awakening. They keep looking for evidence, for confirmation, for something they can explain to others. But awakening doesn't always make sense. It often looks like nothing on the outside is changing, while everything on the inside is shifting. It feels like being emptied of what you thought you needed, only to be filled with a presence you can't describe. And if you try to measure that presence with the mind, you reduce it. You shrink it into something it's not. The intellect has its place. It protects, analyzes, organizes, but it cannot touch the depth of the soul. And yet most people rely solely on their intellect because that is what they were taught. They were never shown how to feel without analyzing, how to listen without responding, how to be without achieving. So when the soul begins to rise, when it begins to whisper truths the mind can't process, they reject it. They call it nonsense. They label it as weakness. They fear they are losing touch with reality, when in fact they are touching something beyond it. And this beyond is not a fantasy, it is the deeper truth that has been drowned out by noise. When you stop trying to interpret every emotion, when you let go of needing every sign to make sense, when you simply feel, you enter a space the mind cannot guide you through. It is the sacred unknown, and the more you trust it, the more you begin to hear the language of your own soul. Not in words, but in resonance. Not in thoughts, but in knowing. There will be moments when everything in your body says, "This is right," even though your mind can't explain why. There will be times you feel pulled towards someone or something, and no logic can define the reason. There will be dreams that feel more real than your waking life, signs that feel too precise to be coincidence, a rhythm to your pain that feels orchestrated. That is not imagination. That is alignment. That is the soul trying to communicate with you in the only way it knows how. But if you dismiss these moments, if you demand proof before belief, you block the very flow that is trying to awaken you. You reduce magic to mechanism. You trade truth for certainty. You stay trapped in the mental constructs that were never meant to lead you home. The soul is subtle. It will not shout. It will not argue. It will wait. And if you are not listening with the ears of the heart, you will miss the message entirely. So learn to listen differently. Not with judgment, but with presence. Not with logic, but with openness. Trust the dream that moves you. Trust the tears that surprise you. Trust the gut feeling that cannot be reasoned away. The soul speaks quietly, but it speaks truth, and when you finally begin to hear it, you'll realize it's been speaking all along. There is a moment in the process of awakening when everything you used to cling to begins to fall apart. Your patterns stop working. The people you once depended on no longer feel like home. The dreams you chase begin to lose their meaning. And at the center of it all is this terrifying sensation of losing control. It's as if your hands can no longer grip the steering wheel of your life. And for most people, that moment is unbearable. They try to hold on tighter, to force clarity, to demand stability. But the more they tighten their grip, the more everything slips away. You see, the spiritual awakening is not something you manage. It is not a project you complete or a goal you master. It is not a process you get to control. It is a sacred unraveling that demands the opposite. It asks for surrender, not just of the external structures, but of the internal ones too. The beliefs, the identities, the illusions of power. And that is where most people falter, because the loss of control feels more terrifying than the loss of self. They would rather live in a known misery than step into the unknown freedom. We have been conditioned to believe that control equals safety, that to plan, to predict, to be certain is to be secure. But the soul is not interested in security. It is interested in truth. And truth is wild. It moves without warning. It calls you into directions that make no sense to the rational mind. It invites you to walk paths that require faith, not certainty. And in those moments, when the soul calls and the mind trembles, most people hesitate. They bargain. They negotiate. They try to awaken without letting go. But you cannot bring your cages with you into freedom. You cannot awaken and still cling to what was. Something must be released. And that something is often what you thought defined you. The roles, the accomplishments, the reputation, the plans. You must let it all fall away, not because it wasn't valuable, but because it is no longer you. And in that letting go, there is grief. The kind of grief that comes not only from losing what you loved, but from realizing you never truly loved it. You only needed it to feel in control. There is no map for this part, no step-by-step instructions. You will feel lost. You will feel raw. You will feel as if you are disappearing. And that is exactly what's happening. The false self, the constructed self, is fading. The self that was built on approval, on achievement, on pleasing others, is dissolving. And in its place, something ancient, something eternal, begins to emerge. But it doesn't emerge with fanfare. It emerges in the quiet, in the stillness, in the silence that follows surrender. Most people fear that silence. They interpret it as emptiness, not realizing it is space, sacred space, room for the real self to rise. But the silence is not controllable. You cannot schedule it. You cannot manipulate it. You must meet it as it is, without resistance. That is the path. That is the doorway. And that is why so few walk through it. Because it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like death. And yet, what dies is not you. What dies is who you are not. What dies is the need to perform, to prove, to pretend. What dies is the voice that tells you that you must be someone else to be worthy of love. And what is born is not something new, it is something remembered. It is the part of you that was always there, buried beneath all the layers you thought you needed to survive. But survival is not the same as living, and awakening is not about survival, it is about returning to life. So when the moment comes, and it will, when you feel yourself standing at the edge of everything you know and fear grips your chest, and the urge to run back to the familiar becomes overwhelming, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? Is it the unknown, or is it the truth? Is it the darkness, or is it my own light? Because more often than not, it is not the fall we fear, it is the flight. It is the realization that we are far more than we've been pretending to be. To awaken is to let go, not once, but again and again. It is to loosen your grip on what you think your life should be and to allow something greater to guide you. And yes, it is terrifying, but it is also holy. Because in that surrender, in that sacred exhale, you finally remember who you really are. Most people expect awakening to feel like an elevation, like something that lifts them above the world and offers them clarity, power, and peace. But in truth, awakening often feels like exile. You don't rise above the world, you fall out of the world you once knew. The people around you, the systems you once trusted, the conversations you used to enjoy, they no longer resonate. It's not that they have changed, you have. And because of that, you begin to feel like a stranger in your own life. You walk into a room full of familiar faces and yet you feel alone. You hear laughter, but it sounds distant. You try to join in, but something inside you remains quiet, observing, disconnected. It's not depression, it's not arrogance. It's the echo of the soul realizing it no longer belongs where it once felt at home. This is one of the most disorienting parts of awakening. The external world continues as if nothing has happened, but your inner world has shifted completely. And you can't explain it. Not in words that others will understand, because they haven't seen what you've seen. They haven't felt what you've felt. And so the distance grows. Loneliness during awakening is not a mistake. It's part of the process. You're shedding old frequencies, old patterns, old attachments, and in that shedding, space opens up. But before it fills with what is aligned and true, it remains empty. That emptiness is where you confront the parts of you that only felt valuable when others approved. That space is where the part of you that depended on belonging is asked to let go of fitting in. Because to truly awaken is to step outside of the need for validation. And that often means standing alone. Many cannot bear that silence. They rush to fill it. They go back to old relationships, old habits, old identities. Not because they still believe in them, but because they offer familiarity. And familiarity feels safer than emptiness. But if you return to what no longer resonates, you betray yourself. You shrink back into the person you were never meant to remain. You silence the voice that's just beginning to rise. And that silence, that self-abandonment, is far lonelier than any temporary isolation could ever be. Real awakening will cost you comfort. It will cost you company. It will cost you the illusion of belonging. Because you are not here to belong to the world as it is. You are here to help birth the world as it could be. And that path is narrow. It is not crowded. It is not celebrated. Often it is walked in silence. Often you will feel as if you are the only one who sees what you see, feels what you feel, knows what you know. But that solitude is not punishment, it is initiation. It's in the quiet, in the absence of noise and distraction, you begin to hear your own soul clearly, without the pull of external opinions, without the masks you once wore to be liked, without the roles you played to feel needed. Something real begins to emerge. Your own voice. Not the voice you learned to imitate, not the one you adopted to fit in, but the ancient, timeless voice that has always been with you, the one that whispers truths that make no sense to the world, but feel like home to your heart. But to follow that voice, you must be willing to walk alone. You must be willing to be misunderstood. You must be willing to disappoint others. Because when you start living in alignment with your soul, you no longer fit into the molds others expect of you. You begin to value depth over comfort, silence over small talk, truth over approval. And that shift will confuse people. It will unsettle them. It may even anger them. But it is not your job to make others comfortable with your growth. It is your job to remain true to the path that chose you. Loneliness in awakening is a rite of passage. It is the empty space that makes room for divine connection. It is the desert that prepares you for rain. It is the silence that sharpens your inner hearing. And while it hurts, deeply, sometimes unbearably, it also strengthens you. It teaches you to rely on your own knowing. It shows you that you are not who people think you are. You are not who the world told you to be. You are something infinitely more vast, more sacred, more enduring. And eventually, in time, the loneliness shifts. What once felt like isolation begins to feel like solitude. What once felt like exile becomes sanctuary. Because you no longer seek the world to fill your emptiness. You allow the fullness of your own presence to meet you. And in that space, others will come. Not the ones who were drawn to your mask, but the ones who recognize your soul. Not many, just enough. Just the ones who matter. To walk alone is not the same as being lost. It is often the first sign that you are finally on the right path. One of the most unsettling truths of a spiritual awakening is this. It does not just illuminate your light, it also drags your shadow into full view. And this is the part most people are not ready for. They imagine awakening as an ascent into bliss, a gentle remembering of love and truth. But, in reality, the soul cannot rise unless the shadow is acknowledged. Awakening is not the escape from darkness, it is the confrontation with it, and not the darkness out there, but the darkness within. This is what no one warns you about. The light you're searching for will blind you if you're not prepared to see what it reveals. Because once you awaken, you cannot unknow what you've seen. You begin to notice the lies you've told yourself, the masks you've worn so long you mistook them for your face, the ways you've manipulated others for love, avoided truth for comfort, betrayed your own values just to belong. It all rises, it all returns, not to punish you, but to ask for healing. And that healing will demand your presence, your honesty, your humility. This is why so many turn back. They reach a point in the awakening where the mirror becomes too clear. They can no longer blame the world, no longer project their pain onto others. They must look at themselves. And what they see is not always beautiful. And yet, that very ugliness is the doorway to wholeness. Because you are not just your light, you are also the grief you never processed, the anger you never admitted, the fear you buried so deeply you forgot it was there. All of it is you. And if you reject it, you fragment yourself. You remain divided, and in that division, true peace is impossible. Facing the shadow is not easy. It humbles you. It brings you to your knees. You begin to understand that you are not better than anyone. You are simply human, capable of both light and darkness, capable of harming and healing. And this realization is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. Because once you stop pretending to be perfect, you can begin the real work. The inner alchemy. The integration of all that you are. And integration means this. You no longer judge your wounds. You listen to them. You no longer fear your anger. You understand it. You no longer suppress your sadness. You sit with it. You allow it to speak. And slowly, layer by layer, the shadow loses its power over you. Not because it disappears, but because it is finally seen. And when something is seen, it is no longer in the dark. It is brought into the light of awareness, where it can be held, transformed, and ultimately loved. You cannot heal what you deny. You cannot transcend what you refuse to touch. You cannot reach the soul's depth by skipping over its pain. And so the shadow becomes your teacher. It becomes the compass that points to the places within you that still need care, not discipline, not suppression, care. And that care, honest, patient, compassionate care, is what awakens true power. Not the kind of power that controls others, but the kind that allows you to stand in your truth without needing to hide. But this process is raw, it is emotional, it is confusing. There are days when you will question everything. You will wonder if you're going backward, if you're breaking instead of healing. You will miss your numbness, you will envy those who seem untouched by depth. But in those moments, remember, the very fact that you are feeling is a sign that you are alive. The pain is not the problem, it is the pointer. It shows you where you still carry fragments of your past, where you've silenced parts of yourself, where love has yet to reach. Most people never make it through this stage. They want healing without honesty, peace without process. But awakening is not a bypass. It is a descent into the very depths of your being. It is the dismantling of everything false and the resurrection of what is real. And what is real is not always pretty, but it is always sacred. Your scars are sacred. Your confusion is sacred. Your rage, your silence, your despair, they all hold truth. They all deserve a place at your table. You are not broken. You are becoming whole. And wholeness includes everything. It does not require you to be polished. It asks you to be present, to meet yourself again and again without running, without judgment, and in doing so you become someone the world rarely sees, someone who has met their own darkness and did not turn away, someone who no longer fears what lives inside them, someone who has found freedom not by escaping themselves, but by embracing everything they are. That is real awakening, not light without shadow, but light that has made peace with the dark. There comes a point on the path of awakening when you realize the destination you thought you were heading toward does not exist in the way you imagined. You believed, perhaps, that there would be an end point, a place where everything finally made sense, where the pain would vanish, the confusion would lift, and you would stand in some permanent state of peace. But what unfolds instead is something far more mysterious and humbling. The realization that awakening is not a one-time event, something interplay in the interlacing, shifting motions of our awakening. It is a continual process, a lifelong unfolding, and this realization can be both liberating and deeply disorienting. Because in the beginning there is often a surge, a moment of clarity, a flash of insight, a rupture in the fabric of what you thought was real. Something opens, something shifts, and in that moment, you feel alive in a way you never have before. You feel touched by something sacred, moved by a truth that exists beyond the mind. But that moment does not last. It fades. And what follows is often the slow, grinding work of integration, of learning how to live with what has been revealed, of returning to daily life with new eyes and no roadmap. And here is where the illusion falls apart. Because most people chase that initial high. They want to return to that peak moment, that spark of transcendence, and when it doesn't come, they doubt everything. They think they've lost it. They think something went wrong. But nothing went wrong. What happened is that the soul descended deeper. The work moved inward. The light turned its gaze toward the subtle, the hidden, the unhealed. And this phase, the slow and silent one, is no less important than the dramatic breakthrough. In fact, it is often more powerful, because it is in this space that real transformation begins. But this kind of transformation is not visible. It doesn't come with signs and applause. It doesn't announce itself. It moves like roots beneath the surface, invisible but essential. And because of that, it can feel lonely. You may look around and see others living seemingly simple, ordinary lives, while you carry this invisible weight, this ever-deepening awareness, this relentless pull toward authenticity. You may wonder why you feel so different, so sensitive, so moved by things others seem numb to. You may even wish to go back to how things were before you awakened. But you can't. You can never unknow. That's the cost of truth. It changes you, not in an instant, but over time. And that change is often subtle. It doesn't always look like external success or spiritual bliss. It looks like honesty, like saying no when you used to say yes, like walking away from what no longer feels right, even when you have no idea what comes next, like crying when you're supposed to smile, resting when the world demands you keep going, telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. This is the real work, the quiet, steady return to your inner alignment. Awakening, then, is not about arriving. It's about becoming. It's not about reaching a state where everything is fixed and clear. It's about deepening your capacity to be with life as it is, to stay open in the face of uncertainty, to remain grounded when nothing makes sense, to trust that the soul knows even when the mind does not. And this requires surrender, not the kind of surrender that means giving up, but the kind that means giving in, leaning into the mystery, allowing life to shape you, not according to your expectations, but according to your essence. You must let go of the fantasy that awakening will make you invulnerable. It won't. If anything, it will make you more vulnerable, more open, more sensitive, more aware of the suffering of others, more attuned to the beauty and the sorrow woven into every moment. You will feel more, not less, and feeling deeply in a world that is often numb is not easy. But it is necessary, because only those who feel can truly love. Only those who are present to their pain can hold space for the pain of others. And that is what the world needs. Not more perfection, but more presence. The path is not linear. You will spiral. You will return to old wounds with new eyes. You will forget and remember, fall and rise, lose yourself, only to find a deeper truth waiting beneath the fragments. Do not mistake this for failure. It is the rhythm of real growth, a dance between light and shadow, between clarity and confusion. It is not a straight line, it is a spiral inward, always bringing you closer to the truth of who you are. So when you feel tired, when you question the point of it all, when you wonder why it feels so endless, know this: the depth of your journey is not a burden, it is a blessing. To awaken is not to arrive, it is to keep waking up, again and again, in each moment, in each breath, to the sacred truth that life is not something to conquer or control, but something to meet with your whole being, with eyes open and heart bare. And that is where your freedom lives, not in the end, but in the willingness to begin over and over again. So, if you find yourself unraveling, breaking, doubting everything you once believed, don't run, don't numb, don't call it a mistake, call it a beginning. Because the reason most people never survive their spiritual awakening is not because they aren't chosen, it's because they resist the death of who they were. But if you allow that death, if you surrender to the fire and walk through it, you will emerge reborn. Not perfect, not finished, but true. And in that truth, there is a peace no illusion could ever give you. The world may not recognize who you've become, but your soul will finally feel at home.